After e4, d6, d4, knight f6, and knight to c3, black can play c6. This move now has to be dealt with in a different way, slightly different way than all the other variations that we've been dealing with. Of course, a lot of patterns will be familiar, and if you've been following this Pirc saga, you know exactly how to destroy the Pircs. But let's see the ideas here. Black intends to attack on the queen side with b5, a5, b4, and so on, and the knight is putting pressure on e4. Now here the move to continue is f4. We're taking advantage of this extra pawn move that black did to get the idea of playing e5, and obviously we're attacking that pawn 2 times, and we're attacking that square multiple times. So we're gonna go through 2 main options, one of them being the main move queen a5, which is there to simply pin the knight so that black has an attack on e4 and is trying to induce us to play bishop to d3. The other move is g6. So let's start with g6. Now here white goes on with knight f3, and after b5, the early attack on this knight, as that was mentioned, and it was like the whole point of playing c6 is to play b5, b5, and also queen a5, idea of pinning the knight. So that's how it's going to be. Here you have to play bishop d3 to defend the pawn in e4, because b4 will lose the central pawn for you, and that's not good. So b4 now, knight to e2, bishop to g7, a3. And that's it. You've simply now eliminated the queenside pawn's attack that our opponent is doing to you. Because now if the pawn were to take you, this will make no sense. You're just going to get the rook on an open file. If instead black defends it, well, let's say for example, if black goes on and castle, right? You just win a free pawn. That's it. No compensation. If black plays queen to a5 to protect the pawn, and also, well, to pin the pawn in a3, because now we can't take, because queen will take the rook. Now here this is a really bad move, because simply bishop d2 wins the pawn. And by the way, a move like c5 cannot be played to support it because of e5. And let me tell you how wrong things go when that happens. So let's go back a couple of moves. So instead of queen a5, black has played b4, we played knight e2, bishop to g7, a3, right? Now, as we said, we're going to win the pawn. c5 cannot be used to defend that pawn, although it looks like it, but now e5 just wins. And now we're going to go through pawn takes in e5. The black player can't just remove the knight. Let's say knight to d5. Here we just start taking, okay? Taking c5, pawn takes back, and now check. The bishop cannot interpose because queen takes knight for free. The bishop can't take back in b5 because it'll be dropping the rook in a8, so that's not possible. Same thing knight d7, like you're just attacking the knight. So the king is forced to move to f8. Okay, now we take the pawn here. The knight is pinned. The knight can't take in b4 because then the queen will be taken for free. So pawn takes back unless our opponent wants to give us free pawns. h4 comes now, the idea of playing h5. Remember, h6 traps the bishop. The bishop can't move anywhere because we have this amazing pawn chain. Now you start to understand why e5 happened, why f4 and d4, why our opponent shouldn't play the Pirc, why he should take control of the center rather than just moving silly one-step pawn moves like a child will do. Bishop e6, speeding up development, whatever. h5 comes. Queen to b6, these are all best moves, but they're pointers. It's attacking the bishop, so knight e to d4, protecting the bishop. Everything is perfectly held together. There's no way to develop here. It's this rook can never play, this rook can never really play. Position evaluated +4 or +5 or something. The development of the knight here is immediately punished. You play rook to a6, and here if the queen goes to c5, to c7 or to d8, it's completely game over, because let's make an example, c5, you can just take the bishop for free. When the pawn takes, your knight e6 makes a fork, wins the queen. And the same thing would happen with the queen going to c7 or d8. So you may argue, okay, what if queen, I don't know, b7 or b8, whatever, you take this one. And afterwards you can take this one too, because the knight will no longer be defended. This is just an example of how the line could have gone. But there's lots of different things that can happen. Let's make a recap. But obviously you gotta play knight c3, c6. You gotta work out things by yourself. But you start to recognize the patterns, and you gotta be winning out of the opening. That's really important. f4 comes now. So remember, c6 is met with f4. g6. Later we're going to go through the immediate queen a5. Okay, knight f3, b5. This is creating a problem with b4, so you have to play bishop d3 already. b4, knight e2, bishop g7, a3. Now this idea of c5, as we said, is met with e5. Okay, what if the pawn takes? We take with the d pawn. It's important to understand, like, usually everybody will like, like most players will have a tendency of taking with the f pawn, because, you castle, you got rook on an open file, and it's not bad at all. But here it's better to take with the d pawn, because then you're gonna have this potential bishop e5 move, and usually in the Pirc you will castle alongside, and you wanna open the file for the queen and rook together. Anyway, let's go on. Like here, if I don't know, let's say the knight goes to d7. Here bishop e4 wins the rook. I mean, it doesn't win the rook, wins the knight, sorry. Knight c6, you can take it for free, and then the rook moves, but you win material. So at this point I would rather play like maybe knight to b6, and then the knight can take back. I don't know, whatever, doesn't matter. I'm not even thinking straight. It's late in the night. If instead our opponent goes to, instead of, after take, d takes e5 and d takes e5, if the knight goes to g4, you simply kick it away with h3. Only move to get the knight safe will be h6. But now again, bishop to e4. We don't care about the queen swapping with us, because this rook will still be trapped. So our opponent will lose material. So in this position, what if the knight goes to d5? Okay, check. And now, again, familiar pattern. Bishop d7, you take the knight, and then you're attacking the rook. So you're winning a lot of material. If the king goes to f8, you take here, pawn takes back, and it's basically the same, this transposition into what happened before. h4, what if our opponent doesn't play the bishop e6 move at this point and tries e6? The queen might play to e7 and carry on in a different development. Okay, h5. Remember, h6 traps the bishop. So here, let's say bishop goes to d7. Okay, first of all, take this, swap this, because your bishop's under attack, and then play h6. And you win a piece. If instead our opponent plays h6, so that we don't play h6. Okay, take, knight to h4, familiar pattern. Now we're going for g6. It's really difficult to stop this. You can't play queen e8. You're gonna have to play king f7, but after this, bishop d3 will finalize the attack over this square. If black plays knight to e7, protecting that pawn even further, you play knight to d4. You don't have to worry about the queen taking knight for free, obviously, because bishop g6, there's a discard attack on the queen. I'm not supposed to tell you such easy things. So in this position, we obviously have an idea of playing bishop to e3. This is to support the knight there, and then sacrifice. So knight here will be an ideal sacrifice. Knight takes, queen h5, pinning the knight, winning a lot of material, and our knight in d4 is protected by the bishop. So in this position, what happens after g5? Trying to get rid of this incredible knight. Okay, bishop e4, traps the rook. There's no material compensation. Let's see an example now of the other line, but the thing is that they all transpose into position already existing. So c6 is met with f4. Black can choose to play queen a5. Right. Now here you just play bishop d3, and if black plays b4, we're just having a very similar scenario to the previous example. Although it's recommendable, when the queen goes immediately to a5, it's recommendable to just play bishop d2, so that you don't have to worry about b5, b4, the knight moves, and the discover check. There's nothing. There's absolutely nothing, but you don't want to run into that. Anyway, g6, bishop to d2, you play that immediately. Bishop to g7, knight f3. So it's similar stuff, right? Always keep yourself the possibility to play e5. And the good thing about d4, e4, f4, all these pawns is that e5, the thematic e5 can never happen. And if black plays knight to d7, for example, you know what's that doing, right? It's planning to play e5 and trying to cement something, either a pawn or a knight in this square. Here you just play e5 and you're anticipating it. So by playing this setup with d4, e5, e4, f4, you're preventing any of those usual e5 ideas. And now this bishop will remain stupid. This knight will not develop properly. So let's go back here. Instead of knight d7, if black castles. Okay, well, guess what? e5. And our opponent has no control of any central squares. Let's make an example. Now here, look how things get really bad if black... Okay, black has to take, right? If black plays knight to d5, okay? Well, you take the knight. Now, obviously, there's a discover attack on the queen, so the queen has to take back. But now, c4. And you see how our development and our better placed pieces are preventing our opponent queen from having a single square to go to except e6. It's the only square available. Queen to e6, but now castle. And now black will have to give up material. Let's say if black plays d5 to try and give some more loft for the queen to go to and not be too smothered by the white's attackers. Here f5. That's it. The queen will have to move and then you can keep storming the pawns on the opponent king side. There's no coming back here. If the queen goes backwards, then you just play e6. You're going to smash everything around the opponent king side. We're attacking the queen now, so after pawn takes in e6, now the pawn in f is not there anymore, so you can take this one with an attack here. Pawn takes back, you're infiltrating your pieces. It's a fantastic position to play. You're going to play knight g5, the queen is going to h5. Position evaluated +6 at this point. And in this position, it's not like, you know, the queen going backwards. I mean, it's not like the pawn can just take here, because you can play knight h4. And now you're planning to play the bishop to f5, the queen is coming here, game over. There's nothing, there's no squares to go to with the queen here where she doesn't get taken. So what happens after f6? And after bishop comes to f5 anyway, queen can go to f7. However, you take this bishop now. If the rook takes back, because, well, I mean, our opponent is down a piece, so it has to take back. Queen to g4, attacking the rook. e6 is too weak because we have 1 and 2 attackers. This one is pinned, by the way. And even if the rook goes back to f8, still e6. The queen has to move, but now you can finish off the attack. You got the bishop to h6, the knight to h5, I mean f5. So let's take it from the start, and we're ready to close this video. Black plays knight f6, knight c3, c6. Okay, that move means f4. Early queen a5, bishop to d3. This comes no matter what, so you gotta play bishop d3. Remember to do that. g6, bishop d2. You only play this move when the queen is in a5. Otherwise, you have no reason to. Usually, when black doesn't play the early c6 and queen e5, you will play the bishop to g5. Anyway, bishop g7, knight f3, castle. And now we said e5. Let's make a brief mention of the fact that after pawn takes back, here you take back with the f pawn. And after knight to d5, castle. Let's look at this idea. We haven't seen anything like this. Bishop g4 pinning our knight. Queen e1, immediately unpin it. Because we want to be able to move it. We want to be able to play knight g5, knight e4. And after h3, the bishop will be forced away. And you can carry on with h4, h5, and so on. Look at these two amazing bishops. Our opponent is left with the only chance of taking the knight, so we can take back and give us the bishop pair, basically. That's the only thing left to do. Because let's say if black plays knight to d7, for example, then you can trap the queen. Knight d5. You're attacking the queen. You've won a piece. The queen will have to move. So you've won a piece. If queen takes, then c4. The queen is forced to go to e6, but now knight g5. So our opponent has this queen is trapped, by the way. Our opponent has to give us the bishop for the knight. So in this position, instead of developing knight e7 and losing the game, what if bishop takes first? Okay, rook takes back, and now development. Knight d7. Remember, our opponent has swapped too many pieces. Now we can play queen h4. Do you see what it means when your opponent gives you stuff, takes, and then you take back? Your opponent doesn't have anything developed anymore, you do. And now the attack here with rook h3 is just too strong. Our opponent doesn't have the light square bishop, which is a serious problem. h5 doesn't work here because you play e6. Boom! How do you like that? The idea is obviously that when we start swapping pawns, then you can start capturing pawns. So pawn takes pawn in f7 and so on. So if pawn takes us here in e6, you've got access to these two pawns one at a time. Queen b6 is the computer move to react to that. Our opponent doesn't even save the knight. Queen b6 is the computer move. He wants to play queen b2, but that's not a problem. I mean, here we're going to win a piece. And look, if you don't believe me, if at this point black does take the pawn, then rook to g3 is the best move, and we're slowly going to be taking all of these pawns. There is no coming back at this point. Rook to f6, knight to e4. Everything's attacking everything. This one and this one. Just close the line here.